I let my wife take the house in the divorce without arguing. No raised voices, no courtroom drama, no last-minute objections. When the mediator looked at me like I was making a mistake, I just nodded and said I wanted a clean break. The house, the furniture, the equity, all of it. She smiled like she'd won something. Friends told me I was being too generous. My lawyer asked me twice if I was sure. Even the judge paused before signing off as if waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. I signed where I was told. I transferred the insurance. I stepped back from the policies. I walked away calmly, carrying nothing but my clothes and my son's backpack. What no one in that room seemed to understand was this. I wasn't giving up a house. I was giving up responsibility. I'd spent my entire career as an insurance adjuster. I knew exactly how coverage works, and more importantly, how it fails. I knew which protections only exist because someone is quietly maintaining them, which policies look solid on paper, but collapse the moment something real happens. My wife thought insurance was automatic. She thought if something went wrong, a check would appear and fix it. She never asked what wasn't covered. She never asked what protections I'd been carrying without telling her. She never asked why I wasn't fighting harder, and I wasn't about to explain it. Because the moment she told the mediator she was taking everything and that I could handle the kid, I realized something important. She didn't want partnership. She wanted ownership, without liability. So I let her have exactly what she asked for. The house, the assets, and the risk she never bothered to understand. When the damage finally came, it didn't look dramatic, but the insurance response was. And by then, there was nothing left for me to say. People assume divorces explode. Ours didn't. It ended the way a long insurance claim closes when no one wants to argue anymore. Quietly, with signatures and polite nods, like everyone was relieved the paperwork finally matched the reality. We'd been married for 11 years, long enough for routines to replace conversations, long enough for we to slowly become mine and yours, without either of us announcing when that happened. Her name is Rachel. She was organized, decisive, and very good at presenting confidence as competence. Friends admired her. Mediators trusted her. And for most of our marriage, I let that confidence carry the room while I handled the details no one wanted to think about. Because that was my job. I wasn't just an insurance adjuster by profession. I was one by temperament. I planned for what broke, not what looked good. I kept policies updated, riders active, coverage layered in ways that never came up in dinner conversations. Rachel didn't see that as protection. She saw it as pessimism. Whenever I raised concerns, she'd roll her eyes and say the same thing. Something always goes wrong in your head. I learned to stop correcting her. The divorce started the same way the marriage ended. Practically. No infidelity, no screaming matches, just a slow inventory of who wanted what. Rachel wanted the house because it was simpler. She wanted the accounts because she'd earned stability. She wanted a clean image. Amicable, fair, reasonable. Then she looked at our son, Elliot, and said something that told me exactly who this was really about. "You're better with routines," she said to me, not unkindly. "You can handle him. I need space." She didn't say temporary. She didn't say shared. She said handle. The mediator wrote it down without blinking. I didn't argue. I didn't point out that I'd already been handling most of it. School forms, medical appointments, bedtime schedules. I didn't remind her that Elliot had always come to me when something broke, hurt, or scared him. I just nodded. That was the moment everyone thought I lost. They saw a man giving up property and keeping responsibility, and they assumed weakness. What they didn't see were the forms sliding across the table, the insurance transfers, the quiet checkboxes changing hands. Rachel took the house. I took my son. And the policies, the ones that mattered, changed ownership without anyone asking the questions that should have stopped the room cold. At the time, it looked like a fair ending. It wasn't. It was the moment the liability stopped being shared, and no one in that room understood what that would cost her. Except me. Rachel didn't move out all at once. She edited the house. At first, it was subtle. The kind of changes people make when they're convincing themselves they're being practical. Extra chairs gone, lamps missing. A rug I remembered buying together suddenly replaced with something cheaper and easier to clean. She framed it as decluttering. "Why keep things we don't need?" she said. "I'm simplifying." I didn't challenge it, because I could already see the pattern forming. Over the next few weeks, items disappeared with more intention. Furniture sold online, boxes stacked near the door, deposits quietly redirected into accounts I no longer checked unless I had a reason to. I gave myself a reason. I started tracking movements the way I would on a claim, not to accuse, but to understand exposure. What was leaving? What was staying? What responsibilities were being reassigned without discussion? Rachel treated the house like inventory. She talked about resale value, market timing, making it show-ready. She never mentioned risk, never asked what changes might affect coverage, never asked why certain things had been insured separately in the first place. She assumed insurance followed ownership automatically. It doesn't. I watched her take over the renewals next. She said she wanted one less thing on my plate now that we were separating. She asked me to forward login details and agent contacts. I did. I always had. She skimmed documents instead of reading them, clicked through endorsements without pausing, declined add-ons she didn't recognize because they looked unnecessary. When I mentioned exclusions, just once, she laughed. "You always think something bad is about to happen," she said. "If something goes wrong, insurance covers it. That's the whole point." I didn't respond. That was the moment I stopped protecting her from her own confidence. Rachel also stopped listening to me altogether. Friends replaced expertise. Group chats replaced professionals. Someone at work told her she was being smart by cutting costs. An online forum reassured her that modern policies were basically all-inclusive. I became the negative voice she no longer needed. "You're too close to it," she said one night. "You see disasters everywhere." What she didn't see was that disaster isn't dramatic when it arrives. It's procedural. It shows up as exclusions, deductibles, coverage limits, and claim denials written in language no one reads until it's too late. By the time Elliot and I moved into our smaller place, the transition felt complete. Rachel had the house, the accounts, the appearance of control. I had my son, my routines, and a growing awareness that the safety net she thought she owned had never really been hers. It had been mine, and she was busy cutting pieces out of it without realizing she was standing on the last threads. I didn't warn her. Warnings invite arguments. I just watched her finalize decisions she didn't understand, and let the responsibility finish transferring itself. The first renewal came through 3 months after the divorce finalized. Rachel forwarded it to me with a single line attached. "Can you take a quick look, just to make sure it's fine?" That word again. Fine. I opened the document and scanned it the way I'd scanned thousands of policies before. Not for what was included, but for what had quietly disappeared. The umbrella coverage was gone. So were 2 specialty riders I'd added years earlier after a near-miss incident on the property. At the time, Rachel had barely noticed. She'd said I was overthinking it. Now those protections were simply absent. I replied with one sentence. "Looks accurate based on the selections." It wasn't a lie. It was exactly what she'd chosen. Over the next few weeks, the house continued changing in ways that would have raised red flags if anyone had been looking. Renovation started without permits being pulled correctly. Electrical work was done by a guy someone knew. Old drainage issues were patched cosmetically instead of repaired. Every shortcut shaved a little money. Every shortcut increased exposure. Rachel narrated it all as progress. She sent photos, before and after shots, messages about how much equity she was unlocking. She talked about refinancing once the upgrades were done. I didn't interrupt, because I could already see the claim file forming in my head, the one she didn't know she was building. Then came the line that confirmed everything. We were exchanging Elliot at the curb one evening when she gestured toward the house and said, smiling, "Honestly, I don't know why you were always so stressed about it. It's solid, and it's insured." Insured. As if that single word closed every door. I nodded and helped Elliot into the car. That night, I opened my old work laptop and pulled up archived inspection photos from years earlier. Hairline cracks in the foundation. A water intrusion note I'd flagged but never escalated because we'd addressed it responsibly at the time. Those records still existed. The coverage that would have absorbed the consequences did not. I closed the laptop and shut it down. From that point on, I stopped answering Rachel's insurance questions entirely. Not because I was angry, but because my involvement would have reattached liability that no longer belonged to me. The distance between us grew quietly. She interpreted it as indifference. It wasn't. It was precision. I focused on Elliot, on routines, on building something stable that didn't rely on assumptions. Mornings became predictable, evenings calm, no alerts, no emergencies. Meanwhile, Rachel continued upgrading a house she believed was protected by default. She didn't know what I knew, that insurance isn't a promise, it's a contract. And contracts don't care how confident you felt when you signed them. They only care what's written and what isn't. By the time the first heavy rainstorm hit that fall, the file in my head was already complete. Rachel just hadn't submitted it yet. The rain started overnight. Not dramatic at first, just steady, patient, the kind that seeps instead of floods. By morning, streets were slick and gutters full, but nothing on the news suggested anything unusual. I dropped Elliot off at school like normal. By noon, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. Her message was short, rushed. "Do you know who I should call for water damage?" I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. I asked where the water was coming from. "Basement," she replied. "Probably just runoff. It's fine." Probably. I didn't correct her. I didn't ask for photos. I didn't suggest mitigation steps that would have been automatic muscle memory a year ago. Instead, I told her to contact her insurer directly. She sent a thumbs up. An hour later, the call came. This time, her voice was tight. "They're asking questions," she said, "about prior issues, about drainage, about permits." I could hear papers rustling in the background. Someone else talking. The claim had started. I asked her one question. "Did you disclose the foundation history?" Silence. "I didn't think it mattered," she said finally. "That was years ago." I closed my eyes. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table while Elliot did homework across from me. Rain tapped against the window. Calm. Ordinary. My phone rang again. "They're saying part of it isn't covered," Rachel said. "Something about pre-existing conditions and excluded water intrusion." Part of it. That phrase always comes first. Coverage doesn't fail all at once. It peels back in layers. I told her to send everything in writing and wait for the adjuster's report. She didn't sound reassured. The next day, the rain stopped. The damage didn't. Moisture spread behind finished walls, flooring warped, electrical systems flagged as unsafe. The temporary fixes she'd done suddenly became evidence, not improvements. The adjuster asked for documentation, permits, receipts, disclosures. Rachel had photos and confidence. She didn't have coverage. By the end of the week, the claim letter arrived. Partial denial, high deductible, exclusions triggered. The numbers at the bottom were the kind that don't look real until they're yours. Rachel called me that night crying. "They're not paying," she said, "not most of it. This doesn't make sense." I listened. When she asked what to do, I gave her the only answer I could without crossing a line I'd already drawn. "You should talk to your adjuster." She hung up. I tucked Elliot into bed and turned off the lights. For the first time since the divorce, the risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It had moved out of the paperwork and into the walls, and there was nothing left for me to prevent, because prevention had been signed away months ago. The next few weeks were a slow unraveling, not loud, not dramatic, just invoices arriving faster than answers. Rachel sent me screenshots of emails from contractors and adjusters, hoping I'd spot something she'd missed. A loophole, a phrase she could argue, a way to make the numbers bend back into place. I didn't open them. Once you step back from a policy, you don't get to half-step forward. Advice becomes involvement. Involvement becomes liability. She learned that lesson the hard way. The estimates climbed quickly. Mold remediation, electrical rewiring, structural reinforcement that should have been done years ago, back when the house was still fully protected. Each line item came with a phrase I recognized immediately. Not covered, excluded, out of scope. Rachel tried to negotiate with the adjuster the way she negotiated everything else, confidently, insistently, assuming persistence would turn into progress. It didn't. Insurance doesn't care how persuasive you sound. It cares what you agreed to. By mid-month, she was forced to make choices she'd never had to make before. Delay repairs and risk further damage. Pay out of pocket and drain what was left of the accounts she'd fought so hard to keep. She chose the second. I heard about it through Elliot, who mentioned casually that his mom was selling some stuff again. Furniture, electronics, things she'd once called investments. The house wasn't inventory anymore. It was a liability. Rachel called me one last time after the second denial came through. This one was shorter, colder. "You knew this could happen?" she said. I didn't argue. "Yes," I replied. She waited. For regret, for guilt, for an apology that would reopen the door she'd closed herself. None came. "I didn't do this to you," I said calmly. "I stopped doing it for you." She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I reviewed my own accounts, the ones that no longer carried her name or her assumptions. Everything was stable, predictable, boring in the best possible way. Elliot asked me if his mom was going to be okay. I told him the truth. "She's figuring things out," I said, "just like everyone does." It wasn't cruel. It was accurate. Because for the first time since I'd known her, Rachel wasn't protected by optimism or confidence or someone else's quiet work in the background. She was facing the math. And the math didn't care how certain she'd been when she signed. Rachel didn't collapse all at once. She tried to solve it first. That was always her instinct. Find a workaround, a creative angle, someone who would tell her what she wanted to hear. She met with contractors who promised cheaper fixes. She called public adjusters who hinted they could pressure the insurer. She spent hours on forums where people swapped stories about how they'd forced coverage through persistence alone. None of it worked, because the problem wasn't attitude, it was structure. The house had crossed a threshold where optimism stopped mattering. Once exclusions were triggered and disclosures were incomplete, every attempt to fix the situation only created more documentation, more proof that the loss wasn't sudden or accidental, but rooted in conditions that predated the policy as it existed now. That distinction was fatal. Rachel started asking questions she should have asked years earlier. Why certain riders existed, why umbrella coverage mattered, why insurance companies asked about known issues instead of recent events. She asked me those questions too, not directly, not yet, but through Elliot. "Mom wanted to know why water damage from before matters now," he said one evening, repeating it the way kids do, without realizing they're carrying adult panic in their voices. I chose my words carefully. "Because insurance covers surprises," I told him, "not things people already know about." That answer followed him back to her. A week later, Rachel reached out again, this time calmer, quieter. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. I don't understand how this happened so fast." It hadn't happened fast. It had happened gradually, with confidence and shortcuts and assumptions layered over time until the moment reality finally pressed back. I explained only what was necessary, how coverage is cumulative, how responsibility follows authority, how stepping into control without understanding risk doesn't remove it, it concentrates it. She listened without interrupting. Then she said the thing I hadn't heard from her in years. "I thought you were just being difficult." That wasn't an apology, but it was close. By then, the financial pressure had shifted from abstract to immediate. Credit limits tightened, repair timelines shortened. Contractors demanded deposits up front instead of trust-based scheduling. Rachel had to make decisions she'd never practiced making. She sold the last of the furniture that hadn't already been damaged. She delayed non-essential repairs and lived with sections of the house cordoned off. She stopped talking about refinancing. The house wasn't an asset anymore. It was a drain. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it happen. I felt relief, because for the first time the consequences aligned with the choices that created them. No one was being punished. No one was being tricked. The system was simply doing what systems do when someone stops intervening on behalf of another adult. One night, Rachel asked if Elliot could stay with me longer than planned. "I need time to sort things out," she said. I agreed, not out of leverage, out of stability. As weeks passed, her calls became less frequent. When she did reach out, they were practical, measured. Gone was the confidence that had once filled every sentence. In its place was caution, understanding. Responsibility had finally changed hands. And once it does, it doesn't move back quietly. It stays where it belongs, with the person who insisted on holding it. The house didn't fail all at once. It demanded attention, constantly. Rachel used to describe homeownership as freedom, independence. proof that she'd won something by keeping it. But once the insurance stopped absorbing shock, the house revealed what it really was: a living system that required money, judgment, and restraint every single day, and she had none of the buffer left. The first thing to go wasn't money. It was confidence. I saw it in the way her messages changed: shorter, more careful, less declarative. She stopped telling me what she was doing and started asking what she should do, not directly but indirectly, through Elliot, through mutual friends, through pauses in conversations where she seemed to be waiting for me to step in. I didn't. The contractors she'd hired early on stopped giving her friendly timelines. They started giving her terms, deposits up front, no exceptions, no verbal promises, every estimate written with disclaimers bolded and highlighted. She was now the kind of client people protect themselves from. The adjuster stopped calling. The claim file was closed. That finality hit harder than any denial letter. Once a file closes, there's no argument left to make. You can appeal language, but you can't appeal structure. The exclusions had done their job. Rachel began cutting costs in places that couldn't hide the damage. Rooms stayed unfinished. Repairs were delayed until next month. Temporary solutions became permanent eyesores. Plastic sheeting stayed taped to walls longer than it should have. Elliot noticed. He didn't say anything dramatic. He never asked why his room smelled different or why the hallway light flickered again. He just packed his bag more carefully when it was time to go back to my place. Children adjust faster than adults when stability is clear. Rachel, on the other hand, was adjusting without a map. She tried refinancing. That failed quickly. Appraisals don't care about explanations. They see exposed wiring, water damage history, incomplete repairs, and they price risk accordingly. She tried selling. Buyers asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Disclosures triggered follow-ups. Follow-ups triggered inspections. Inspections triggered negotiations she couldn't win. The house she'd fought to keep started turning people away. That was when the social shift happened. Friends who'd congratulated her on standing her ground stopped bringing it up. Conversations pivoted away from the divorce. No one wanted to discuss repairs or insurance or money anymore. Support evaporates when problems stop being theoretical. I heard about her struggles secondhand, always framed carefully, always incomplete. She's having a hard time. She didn't expect all this. She thought it would be simpler. No one said she'd made a mistake, but no one defended her choices either. That silence was telling. One evening, she called me directly, not to argue, not to accuse, to ask. "If you were in my position," she said quietly, "what would you do?" It was the most honest thing she'd said since the divorce. I didn't give her a strategy. I didn't suggest fixes. I didn't outline options. I gave her the truth. "I'd stop assuming the system will catch you," I said, "and start making decisions like you're the one responsible." There was a long pause. "I didn't realize how much you were doing," she said. I let that sit, because realization isn't useful unless it arrives before consequences. After that, it's just acknowledgement. The real break came when she missed a payment. Not catastrophic, just late enough to trigger penalties and notices. The kind of miss that tells institutions you're no longer operating from surplus. Credit agencies noticed. So did vendors. The house began consuming everything she put into it without giving anything back. Meanwhile, my life had grown quieter. Predictable expenses, clear boundaries, a child who slept through the night without stress seeping into the walls. My finances stabilized in a way I hadn't felt in years, not because I earned more, but because I wasn't absorbing someone else's risk. That contrast did something Rachel couldn't ignore. She wasn't losing to me, she was losing to reality. And reality doesn't care who signed first or who looked confident in mediation. It only responds to preparation. By the time she accepted that, the house had already taken what it was going to take: money, energy, certainty. What remained was responsibility. Fully, finally hers. And there was no one left to quietly shift it back onto. By the time the house stopped dominating every conversation, something else had changed too. I wasn't waiting anymore. For years, even before the divorce, part of my attention had always been elsewhere. Monitoring, anticipating, smoothing out problems before they turned into emergencies. That vigilance doesn't shut off overnight. It fades when there's nothing left pulling at it. And there wasn't. Rachel stopped calling unless it was about Elliot. Not because things had improved, but because there was nothing left for me to absorb. No policies to interpret, no decisions to quietly correct, no safety net to rebuild after the fact. The boundary held. Elliot settled into a rhythm that didn't feel temporary. School mornings were predictable, evenings were calm. Homework happened at the same table every night. When something broke, we fixed it. Together, within our means, without assuming someone else would step in later. That mattered. Children don't need perfection. They need consistency. Rachel eventually made the decision she'd been avoiding. She sold the house. Not at the price she'd imagined. Not on the timeline she'd planned. The disclosures and repair history followed it into every negotiation, pulling the number down inch by inch until acceptance replaced optimism. She downsized into something manageable, smaller, safer, less impressive. For the first time since I'd known her, her life matched her actual capacity instead of her confidence. We spoke once after the sale closed. Not about blame, not about insurance, not about what could have been done differently. She said, "I thought ownership meant freedom." I told her the truth. "Ownership just means responsibility shows up on time." She nodded. That was all. Financially, my life didn't explode upward. It didn't need to. What I gained was margin. No hidden liabilities, no quiet extensions, no temporary fixes that lived forever. My account stabilized, my decisions simplified. The constant low-level anxiety I'd mistaken for adulthood slowly disappeared. At work, I noticed something I hadn't expected. I was sharper. Without carrying someone else's risk in my head, I had room again. To think clearly, to rest, to trust systems instead of compensating for them. Colleagues noticed. Promotions followed, not because I chased them, but because I finally had the bandwidth to accept them. The irony wasn't lost on me. The moment I stopped protecting someone from consequences, my own life became safer. Rachel didn't fail. She learned, expensively, publicly, permanently, and I didn't win by outsmarting her. I won by stepping out of a role I'd never agreed to carry alone. I let her have the house. I let her keep the assets. I let her hold the risk she insisted was manageable. What I kept was quieter but stronger. My name, my integrity, my son's trust, and the peace that comes from knowing this. When you stop confusing responsibility with love, you don't lose anything real. You just stop paying for what was never yours to begin with.